Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 667, and today is August 29th, 2024. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. A lot of news to get through on today's show, but first, need to mention the sponsor of the show, and that is the Expat Money Summit 2024, which is going to be the world's largest offshore event. It will take place entirely online from October 7th through the 11th. I know a few of you have already gotten your tickets to the event. If you want your ticket, head on over to expatmoneysummit.com. Again, that's expatmoneysummit.com, where you could get a complimentary ticket or you could get a VIP ticket. And when you use the promo code Kyle, Kyle, when you check out, you will save $100 off. I will be on one of the VIP panels with our friends Dave DeCamp and Hervoya Morick, talking about World War III. Is it just fear-mongering or a genuine concern? Other speakers include Tom Woods, Dr. Ron Paul, and Scott Horton. So absolutely star-studded lineup. Looks like a great event. I'm very excited to be a part of it this year. And again, if you want your tickets, show notes page, you will find the affiliate link for the complimentary ticket or the promo code. And you could even click a link under the promo code. It'll autofill all that for you to get your VIP ticket. When you use those links, it does help out the show. So for those of you who could do that and sign up and at least get a complimentary ticket, that would be great. But anybody who wants to attend the full summit, be sure to use my promo code because, again, the show does benefit from that. Also, you help the show just by sharing it. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute. We repost the show on the blog at antiwar.com, YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee for the video show version of the show. And of course, it's out anywhere you can listen to audio podcasts. And follow me on Twitter at KyleAnzalone_. Now, as I said at the end of the last episode, we have to talk about the West Bank here on today's show. So, of course, most of the Palestinian population that still lives within territory that is effectively controlled by Israel live in either Gaza or the West Bank, and these two population centers are completely split. And so when we've been talking the past 10 months on the show about the ethnic cleansing going on in Gaza and the Israeli onslaught, what we've been talking about 90% of the time is what's happening in Gaza. But we have taken some brief moments to talk about what's happening in the West Bank as well, where up until earlier this week, already over 600 Palestinians and including over 100 children have been killed in the Israeli attacks, either by soldiers or Israeli settlers in the West Bank. So when you talk about Gaza, of course, all the Palestinians there are effectively living in a prison where the only Israelis that are there now are the IDF soldiers who have invaded Gaza. But before that, the Israelis effectively had Gaza walled off. They would bomb it. They would, fire into Gaza if people marched towards the massive prison fence that separated Gaza from the rest of Israel. Even with their hands held, even if they were clearly civilians, the Israelis would open fire on them and gun them down as if they were some kind of evil terrorist. And so this is the situation for the people of Gaza. Now, in the West Bank, this is area that the Israelis really want. And so over the past several decades, what has happened is Israel has built settlements within the West Bank. Now, a lot of these settlers are people like Itamar Ben-Gvir or Bezalel Smotrich and some of the most radical people within Israeli society, and are willing to use violence to drive Palestinians out of their home and off of their lands so it can be ethnically cleansed of the Palestinians and just become a part of greater Israel. And it seems that over the past couple of days, we've seen some major steps in that direction. So first up here, this one from August 26th, antiwar.com, Dave DeCamp. Israeli settlers kill one Palestinian in the West Bank. Israeli military kills 5 others. So a total of 6 Palestinians were killed by Israeli settlers and military violence in the occupied West Bank on Monday. 5 Palestinians were killed by an Israeli military strike on a house in the Nor Shams refugee camp near the city of Tulkram. The Israeli military claimed it targeted a militant camp, but the Palestinian agency Wafa described the slaying as civilians. Wafa reported that 2 minors were killed by the Israeli strike. one 15-year-old and one 16-year-old. The news agency said the killings bring the total number of Palestinians killed by the Israeli military and settlers since October 7th in the West Bank to 650. Early Tuesday morning, the Palestinian Health Ministry said that Israeli settlers shot dead one Palestinian and wounded three others in Bethlehem. Jewish settler violence in the West Bank has skyrocketed in the wake of October 7th, as most of the attention has been on the slaughter of Gaza. Settlers have also been emboldened by the Israeli government, which includes extremist settlers who are committed to annexing the West Bank. And one of the things that they're actually doing to impact Gaza is a lot of the aid trucks that are bound for Gaza, many of which don't even get in, have to travel from Jordan through the West Bank, Israel, and then they get to Gaza finally. And so when these trucks are in either the West Bank or Israel, these settlers target them. They will beat the drivers. They will disable the trucks, set the trucks on fire, loot or set fire to the aid. And so this is a way to prevent food from getting to the starving people of Gaza. So early on, settler attacks often attack and terrorize Palestinians with the goal of forcing them off their land, with the tacit backing of the Israeli military, which rarely intervenes to stop the violence, but they will stop to watch the violence. A lot of these attacks you'll see where maybe a club or fist-wielding Israeli is trying to beat, or, sometimes they're armed as well. A lot of the settlers are armed, but you'll see these videos where Israelis are beating or threatening violence against Palestinians. And while the Palestinians are on their own land, it should have the right to self-defense, which means, if they had a gun in their house and somebody is threatening to beat you with a bat on your own property, you could get your gun and you could take what action needed to either get them off of your property or to defend yourself. That's how property rights are supposed to work, is that if somebody is on your property threatening you or actually attacking you, you could take the force necessary to push that person or do what is necessary to, disable them as a threat to yourself on your own property. However, the Palestinians cannot do that because there are Israeli military forces that are essentially watching this happen. And the Palestinians know that if they dare lift a fist back to their Israeli aggressors, that they will likely be shot dead and maybe even their family right there on the spot. And so the Israeli military really enforces and allows all this settler aggression to happen against the Palestinian people. The settler violence has been so bad that some members of the Israeli government and security establishment have strongly denounced the attacks, including Ronen Bar, the head of the Israeli agency Shin Bet. Last week, Bar sent a letter to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and focused his criticism on a group of Jewish extremists known as the Hilltop Youth. He said the actions of the settlers should be described as terrorism. It isn't a crime because the use of violence to create intimidation to spread fear, that is terror. And again, this is coming from the head of the Israeli Shin Bet, which is an intelligence service. It isn't quite like, it's something in between the FBI and CIA right there. And so, it would be like, maybe DHS issuing a statement saying that you have a bunch of democratic youth that are a terrorist organization, right? That's the significance of this. All right. So next one up here. Israeli forces launched major assault on the West Bank, killing at least 10 Palestinians. So Israeli forces launched a major assault on the West Bank early Wednesday that appears to be the largest military operation in the occupied territory since the Second Intifada in early 2000. I think in 2002 was when that happened. So the assault focused on northern areas of the West Bank, including Jenin, Tulkram, Tubas, which are targeted by ground raids and airstrikes. So far, at least 10 Palestinians have been killed in the operations that the Israeli military has said will last several days. When the attack started, the Israeli Foreign Minister, Israel Katz, said the West Bank must be dealt with the same way as Gaza, calling for the evacuation of the Palestinians. He said, "We must deal with the threat just as it dealt with the terrorist infrastructure in Gaza, including the temporary evacuation of Palestinian residents and wherever the steps are required. This is a war for all terms and purposes, and we must win it. So, according to Haaretz, the Israeli military said it might allow residents of the areas it's attacking to leave, signaling they could issue evacuation orders. The Palestinian Ministry of Health said that Israeli forces have besieged medical facilities in Jenin and obstructed the movement of vehicles. A spokesperson for the Palestinian Red Crescent Society told CNN that getting to the hospital in Jenin is difficult. The Al-Quds Brigade, the armed wing of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, announced that its fighters were confronting Israeli forces with heavy volleys of direct bullets and claimed that an Israeli drone was down. So far, there have been no reports of Israeli casualties in the attack. Amid Israel's genocidal war in Gaza, violence in the West Bank has also soared. Since October 7th, over 650, now I guess 660 Palestinians have been killed by the Israeli military, including 150 children. Some members of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's governing coalition are settlers themselves and have long pushed for the annexation of the West Bank, including Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, who was among another minister who has another minister position within the defense ministry that puts him in charge of expanding settlements and makes him, in a way, the governor of the West Bank. So the reason I think these two stories are so important is it shows that Israel is not going to stop at Gaza, that this isn't just about dealing with the threat of Hamas and eradicating Hamas or armed Palestinian resistance, but rather eliminating the Palestinian people entirely, or at least removing them entirely from their homeland. Again, the two major places where Palestinians live in historic Palestine are now the West Bank and Gaza. Now, many of the people who live in the West Bank are living in refugee camps. They've been forced out of their families' ancestral homes and things like that. Many of them in the Nakba back in 1948-49, but some more recently as well. And the same is true of Gaza. But the fact that Israel is suggesting here, the Israel Katz, the foreign minister, is suggesting they're going to start issuing evacuation orders, means they're looking to displace a large number of people. Now, on top of that, looking at the reporting, particularly from Jenin, it does look like one of the major things that Israel is working on here is destroying Palestinian infrastructure. We see a lot of bulldozers in the streets completely ripping up the roads. And so, of course, they're trying to make it unpassable and effectively unlivable for the Palestinian civilians of, these areas of the West Bank that they are, again, Jenin, Tulkarm, and Tubas, where they are conducting these larger raids and also airstrikes. So this is, I think, a major concern, and there have been some voices, but not very many. I want to give major credit to Ramzi Baroud, because I think he is one of the first of all, he's a fantastic Palestinian writer. His family is, and he is from Gaza. And so obviously, his really good writing abilities plus his emotional attachment to the issue and the insight he has from being from this area make him just the absolute best writers over the past 10 months on what's happening. But additionally, he's been warning that, everybody's focused on Gaza, and what is happening in Gaza is atrocious and deserves a lot of focus. But nobody is discussing what's happening in the West Bank, where if October 7th hadn't had happened and Israel had just killed 650 Palestinians in the West Bank over the past year, I mean, this would be considered a major slaughter and a major news story, that this many Palestinians were being killed by Israeli settlers and soldiers effectively on a daily basis, or I guess twice a day. You have a Palestinian being killed again in the West Bank, and this should be a major story it's getting absolutely no attention. And it's because the numbers coming out of Gaza and the images coming out of Gaza are absolutely so unbelievably horrific. But what's happening in the West Bank is also really horrific. There's been multiple reports of Israeli soldiers will shoot somebody maybe in the leg, and when Palestinian EMTs get there, they will first try to block the EMTs from getting to the injured injured Palestinian, but even if they reach the person and get them loaded into the ambulance, they won't allow the ambulance to transfer. There was one man where the Israelis said for all Palestinians to travel in the West Bank, you have to have your ID on you at all times. And so they shot a Palestinian, but he didn't have his ID on him. So when they loaded him into the ambulance, the IDF checked for his ID, and when he didn't have it, they refused to let the ambulance pass. And worse, they wouldn't even let the EMTs go try to get the guy's ID. And so, it was just a slow process of him bleeding out somebody who otherwise their life could have been saved. And this is the inhumanity in which the Israelis are treating the Palestinians of the West Bank. It isn't just Gaza, right? Everybody likes to focus on Gaza. And this works for the Israelis because the propaganda narrative around the October 7th attack, which has been partially debunked. I mean, it was an attack that did kill Israeli civilians, and Hamas is responsible for killing some Israeli civilians. So it wasn't like this was just some military operation. However, the propaganda narrative around the October 7th attack has largely allowed Israel to do whatever it wanted in Gaza with the full permission of the U.S. government, and certainly without the U.S. government ever setting any red lines and preventing Israel from, even going as far as to bomb kids playing, a soccer game at a school that is sheltering hundreds of people. Wasn't too far for the United States. Taking the Rafah crossing after President Biden set a red line there wasn't too much for the United States. And so, again, effectively, Israel could do whatever it wants in Gaza. There are doctors who have estimated that the number of dead is around 100,000 already at this point. What that means in the long term with the destruction of infrastructure, how many Palestinians are going to be killed, or if they're all going to be forced out of Gaza entirely. One of those two scenarios seems pretty likely at this point. And so, it's been an absolute horror show, but completely backed and endorsed by the U.S. because, again, of the propaganda narrative around October 7th. When you look at the West Bank, that doesn't exist, right? Hamas isn't in the West Bank. These are Palestinian civilians who are undergoing absolute brutal treatment, and Israel seems to be looking to ramp up a major population movement for the Palestinians in the West Bank as well. Now, I don't think this will be quite as aggressive as what we're seeing in Gaza. They're probably going to just try to continue to displace people from their homes, put them in more temporary housing, which means, more poverty, generational poverty, just things getting worse and worse and worse for the Palestinians until they finally just agree to leave and go somewhere else. At the same time, they are killing a lot of Palestinians as well, still in the West Bank. Again, 650 in the last year only seems insignificant when the number of Palestinians killed in Gaza is 100,000. And so these are major, major operations. And, there's other signs that this is going on as well. So Ben-Gvir says he wants to build a synagogue at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This one from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. Israeli Minister of National Security Itamar Ben-Gvir sparked backlash on Monday by saying he wants to build a synagogue on the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in Israeli-occupied East Jerusalem. Al-Aqsa, known to the Israelis as the Temple Mount, is one of the holiest sites in Islam. Ben-Gvir told Israel's Army Radio, "If I could do what I wanted, a synagogue would be established on the Temple Mount. If I were to say that Muslims are not allowed to pray, you would kill me." Under the decades-old status quo at Al-Aqsa, non-Muslims can visit the site but cannot pray there. Over the past 2 months, Ben-Gvir made 3 provocative visits to Al-Aqsa and declared Jewish prayer was allowed, prompting Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to issue a statement saying the status quo hasn't changed. And now, I do know some people, Jewish people or just Americans who are maybe even Christian, who say, it seems pretty wrong to me that the Jews who go there can't sit and pray. And I kind of agree with that. I guess if I were just in charge of some religious building, I wouldn't necessarily, I think, ban people of a certain religion from praying at the site. However, I think it's important to remember that the Al-Aqsa Mosque is probably the one the one tiny, tiny little piece of all of historic Palestine that the Palestinians still have rights that the other people don't have, when everywhere else the Jewish people have rights that the Palestinians don't have. And so to say that, what's wrong there, you justifies whatever Israel wants to do on the Temple Mount or the Al-Aqsa Mosque. I think the real problem is that, again, this is the one little piece of kind of sovereignty that the Palestinians still have over their ancestral homeland. And, I think that makes what the rules there a little bit more complicated. So Netanyahu's office issued another statement following Ben-Gvir's most recent comment, saying there's no change to the status quo on the Temple Mount. So members of Netanyahu's coalition government also denounced Ben-Gvir's actions, including the interior minister, a member of the Haredi Shah's party. He said Ben-Gvir could hurt Israel's efforts to build a new anti-Iran alliance with Muslim nations. He said Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu must promptly rein in Mr. Ben-Gvir regarding his Temple Mount statements this morning. His reckless words jeopardize Israel's strategic alliance with Muslim nations, which form a crucial coalition against the Iran axis of evil. His lack of judgment could have bloody consequences. So Al-Aqsa is believed to be the site of two ancient Jewish temples. Some Orthodox traditions teach that a third temple will be built in the time of the Messiah and that animal sacrifices will be reinstated as a form of worship. Al-Aqsa and the rules around it are one of the most sensitive issues between the Israelis and the Palestinians. The Palestinians view any change of the status quo as a sign that Israel could be moving to take over the mosque, which is the third holiest site in Islam. Israeli police raids on Al-Aqsa were one major motivation for Hamas's attack on southern Israel, which Hamas named Al-Aqsa Flood. A source close to Hamas told Reuters back in October of 2023 it was triggered by scenes and footage of Israelis storming Al-Aqsa Mosque during Ramadan, beating worshippers and attacking them, dragging the elderly and the young men out of the mosque. All this fueled and ignited the anger. So those are kind of, the main story I wanted to talk about, which was the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people, not only from Gaza, but also the West Bank. I do have a couple other stories here I want to update on what's going on in Gaza. Biden was told Gaza pier would undermine effort to get Israel to allow more aid into Gaza. So President Biden ordered the construction of a temporary pier off Gaza, despite concerns from the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, that the project would undermine efforts to pressure Israel to allow more aid into the Strip via land crossing, USAID's Inspector General said in a report that was released on Tuesday. The report said that multiple USAID officials had expressed concern that their focus on the pier would detract from the agency's advocacy for opening land crossings, which were seen as more efficient and proven methods of transporting aid into Gaza. When President Biden first ordered the construction of the pier during his March State of the Union address, aid groups called the movement a public relations stunt. They pointed out that it's far more efficient to deliver aid through land crossings, the majority of which Israel has kept closed. The Pentagon was also aware that using the pier in the Eastern Mediterranean would be difficult due to weather conditions. The report said the Pentagon's guideline for the pier stated its usage was weather dependent and that it could not operate in conditions beyond what is known as Sea State 3 or short to moderate waves. However, the Mediterranean Sea is often in Sea State 4 with significant winds and waves. Whether or not the pier out of service several times during its short-lived use off the coast of Gaza. The pier operated for only 20 days and delivered a fraction of the aid USAID said it was meant to, due to the seas and a lack of a real plan to make deliveries. Due to the structural damage caused by rough weather and high seas, the pier operated for only 20 days and was decommissioned on July 17th. Additional Additionally, security and access challenges plagued aid distributions once on shore. As a result, USAID fell short of its goal of supplying aid to 500,000 or more Palestinians each month for 3 months, instead delivering enough aid to feed 450,000 Palestinians for a single month, the report says. The report said that the failed project cost more than $230 million. At one point, rough seas broke apart the pier, which cost $22 million to repair. The project also risked escalating U.S. involvement in the genocidal war in Gaza, since U.S. troops were operating right off the coast and could have become targets for Hamas rockets. Secretary of State Lloyd Austin acknowledged the risk to U.S. troops coming under attack and said they had the authority to shoot back in Gaza. And now, one more thing I wanted to point out on this story is, of course, the head of USAID is Sam Power, who is a woman who has spent her entire career looking for a genocide to stop. And when one finally happens, and it's actually being supported by the U.S., and she has all the power in the world to stop it without killing a single person, nothing. Absolutely not. She could have resigned at this point and said that this is absolutely disgraceful. We cannot allow it to go on. And I can no longer be a part of this administration, but she went right along with it. All right. Next up here, Amnesty International urges war crimes probe of indiscriminate Israeli attacks on Gaza camps. This one from Brett Wilkins, originally at Common Dreams, republished at antiwar.com on August 27th. So Brett writes, in an investigation focusing on a pair of Israeli massacres of forcibly displaced Palestinians in Gaza, Amnesty International on Monday urged the International Criminal Court, or the ICC, whose chief prosecutor has already applied for warrants to arrest Israeli and Hamas leaders, to open a war crimes probe of the attacks, which is said were likely indiscriminate and disproportionate. So the report reads, on May 26th, 2024, 2 Israeli strikes on the Kuwaiti peace camp, a makeshift camp for internally displaced people in Tal al-Sultan in West Rafah, killed at least 36 people, including 6 children, and injured more than 100, which early in the assault to Gaza found, Amnesty noted and added that early in the assault on Gaza, it found damning evidence of Israeli war crimes, including indiscriminate killing of civilians. The Tal al-Sultan attack, which hit an Israeli designated safe zone, ignited an inferno that burned people alive inside, in the tents where they were sheltering. One survivor told Amnesty that there were so many dead people around us, many of them in pieces and in pools of blood. The Amnesty report states that the airstrikes, which targeted 2 Hamas commanders staying amid displaced civilians, consisted of 2 U.S.-made GBU-39 guided bombs, and that the use of these munitions, which project deadly fragments over a wide area in a camp housing civilians in an overcrowded temporary shelters, likely constituted a disproportionate and indiscriminate attack and should be investigated as a war crime. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called the Tal al-Sultan massacre a tragic mistake. So Amnesty continued in the report. On May 28th, in a second incident investigated by the Israeli military, fired at least 3 tank shells at a location in the Al-Mawasi area of Rafah, which was designated by the Israeli military as a humanitarian zone. The strike killed 23 civilians, including 12 children, 7 women and 4 men, and many others were injured. So Amnesty International's research found that the apparent targets of the attack were one of Hamas and one Islamic Jihad fighter. This airstrike, which failed to distinguish between civilian and military objectives by using unguided munitions in an area full of civilians sheltering in tents, was likely indiscriminate and should be investigated as a war crime. So Amnesty International's Senior Director for Research, Advocacy, Policy, and Campaigns said in a statement that while these strikes may have targeted Hamas and Islamic Jihad commanders and fighters, once again displaced Palestinians seeking shelter and safety have paid with their lives. The Israeli military would have been fully aware that the use of these bombs, that project deadly shrapnel across hundreds of meters, and unguided tank shells would kill and injure a large number of civilians in sheltering in overcrowded settings lacking protection. The ministry could and should have taken all feasible precautions to avoid or at least minimize harm to civilians. All right, next up here, Iran's Khamenei opens door to direct talks with the U.S. So on Tuesday, the Iranian supreme leader opened the door to talks with the U.S., telling the new Iranian government there was no harm in engaging with the enemy. Iran's new president pledged during his campaign that he would work to get the U.S. and other Western sanctions lifted. He said that the U.S. wanted direct engagement as opposed to indirect talks. The Biden administration was held indirect talks. The Biden administration was held with Tehran. So the new president appeared to get the Ayatollah's blessing to make the effort to negotiate. Now, I'm not sure that this will go anywhere, but I do think it's maybe a signal of kind of the bind that Iran is in, where I think the Ayatollah feels like the retaliation attack on Israel required would spark a larger war in the region to respond to the Israeli assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. And so because of that, I think what Tehran is thinking is that maybe if they engage with the Americans and get the Americans to force the Israelis, essentially, the Americans had the Israelis are a dog and the Americans are the owners, right? Like, we continue to give Israel the weapons they need to do what they're doing in Gaza. And if the Iranians could get the Americans to put the Israelis on a short leash, even for a short amount of time, and could stop the ongoing genocide in Gaza, I do think the Iranians could tout that as kind of a victory and to show that they do have some way to exert some leverage over Tel Aviv. I'm not sure that this plan is going to work out, but it's interesting that the Iranians are, seem so engaged in it. All right, the last story I have today, I wrote for the Libertarian Institute on August 28th, U.S. to ramp up military support for Kenyan operations in Haiti. So the White House is upping its support for Kenyan operations in Haiti by sending an additional 24 armored vehicles. The U.S. is backing Nairobi's armed force in Port-au-Prince. So on Friday, U.S. Southern Command issued a statement on boosting military aid for the Kenyan forces in Haiti. It said, as a part of the U.S. government's ongoing support to the Haitian-led security efforts in the country, 24 additional MRAPs will be delivered and transferred to Kenyan personnel deployed to Haiti as a part of the multinational security support mission. The mission will add the vehicles to its existing fleet of 10 U.S.-provided MRAPs. So earlier this year, Nairobi sent hundreds of armed troops to the Caribbean nation on what it dubs a policing operation. The U.S. orchestrated the deployment of Kenyan soldiers to Haiti. Washington believed the troops could aid Haitian police in restoring power in Port-au-Prince to a government that was set up by the White House following the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse in 2021. Haiti descended into chaos under now two U.S.-backed governments. The White House got authorization to finance, train, and arm the Kenyan-led military force to take control of Haiti from paramilitary groups and gangs from the United States, the UN Security Council. However, the troops are said to be in a policing role and are not operating as UN peacekeepers. Peacekeepers have a dark legacy in Haiti, including causing a cholera outbreak and committing rampant sexual abuse. Prime Minister of Haiti, Gary Conley, said Wednesday that Kenyan forces will begin operations in one of Port-au-Prince's roughest neighborhoods. He said, "It's not going to be quick. We must be patient." So that doesn't seem like the thing you say if you think these operations are going to go well. All right, everybody, that's where I'm going to wrap up the show for today. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Just again, another reminder that, me and my wife are expecting our first child sometime, in the next week, maybe week and a half now. So I'm going to take a couple weeks off of the show, just, spend time with the wife and the baby after she's born. I'll post a couple, even personal updates on Twitter. I know I don't do that much. So if you want to check that out at Kyle Anzalone _. But if not, just wait a couple weeks and I promise the show will return. All right, everybody. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Back with more shows later this week.